The courtroom clock reads 10:23 a.m. A man who once walked penthouse corridors and family boardrooms sits small and hollow behind the defense table. The judge announces the verdict and the room exhales, but it isn't relief. It's the sound of decades of secrets finally colliding with the law. The man's face scarcely moves. Reporters whisper, cameras flash. Outside, the skyline of the city is family help shape, towers of steel and glass stands indifferent to the life now unspooling. This is not merely a tale of murder. Please help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. It is a story about inheritance, about how enormous wealth can shelter someone from suspicion for a long time, and about the brother who, quietly, spent years trying to keep the family name from unraveling. This is the story of one family's fortune, one man's distance from it, and the brother who feared what he could not control. This is the story of Robert Durst and the dynasty he was born into, Durst Organization. It is also the story of the people closest to him, the missing wife, the friend who was shot in her own home, the neighbor whose death shocked a seaside town. The bones of this story are facts, disappearances, charges, trials, but the flesh is the human cost, the ruptured families, and the quiet fear of a brother named Douglas Durst who watched his family's name become a headline. They built towers. They bought blocks. They were the Dursts, a family name sewn into New York skyline for nearly a century. The Durst Organization, started by an immigrant tailor who became a developer, grew into a tightly controlled real estate machine. By the time Robert Durst was born, the family had amassed property and influence, but wealth did not equal warmth. The oldest child of Seymour Durst and Bernice Herstein, Robert carried with him the weight of expectations and the shadow of family tragedy. His mother's death by suicide when he was a child left a scar. The household that remained was wealthy, but emotionally frayed. As Robert reached adulthood, the family business continued without him. He would fight for a larger slice of the trust for years. And those legal battles and their bitter climbs would both isolate and define him. By the 1990s, the Durst Organization was led by his younger brother, Douglas, who cultivated the business and the public face of the family while Robert drifted at the margins. Ownership settlements, lawsuits, and private retreats into a life that cut against the family boardroom low. At times he lived off settlements and pooled trust funds. At other times he vanished into a series of assumed identities and strange relocations. The distance between brother and brother grew from disagreements about money into something colder, suspicion and fear. Into this fractured family history walked three names that would tether Robert's private life to public tragedy: Kathleen McCormick Durst, the young wife who disappeared in 1982, Susan Berman, the confidant who would be found dead in her Los Angeles home in 2000, and Morris Black, a Houston neighbor whose death and dismemberment drew national attention in 2001. Each incident left behind questions that would haunt investigators, prosecutors, family members, and the public for decades. The Durst family's holdings were massive by any measure. The family fortune and holdings across Manhattan and beyond were measured in billions and square footage. Yet the man at the center of the scandals had, for years, maintained an uneasy independence, a life at once connected to and cut off from the dynasty. On a cold January day in 1982, Kathleen McCormick Durst stepped out of view. She was a wife, a former model, and a young woman who had married into immense wealth. Her disappearance began as a bewildering mystery. No body, no clear trail, a family left with only suspicion and grief. Over time, rumors surfaced about a rocky marriage, about arguments, about hurts and control. People who loved her were left without closure. Investigators were left with leads that faded with time. For decades, her case was a cold file that occasionally sparked whispers and renewed investigations, but no definitive answers until much later in the story. In December 2000 in Los Angeles, Susan Berman was found dead, shot execution style in her home. Berman had been a trusted friend of Robert's for years. For some who watched the case unfold, she had been someone who could have known too much about the circumstances around Kathy's disappearance. The crime scene was devastatingly personal: a friend murdered in her own house, a life extinguished in a place that should have been safe. Investigators would later argue that Berman was killed because she could have been a loose thread, someone who might tell authorities about the past. Years would pass before prosecutors would stitch that thread into a case. The coastal town of Galveston, Texas, was the stage for a scene that would become one of the most bizarre chapters in the saga. In 2001, the body of Morris Black, A local drifter and neighbor was found dismembered and floating in the water. The discovery stunned residents. Robert was arrested after an encounter with police. He admitted cutting up the body but always claimed self-defense, saying that Black had attacked him. The details were gruesome and surreal, a dismemberment that raised painful questions about motive and mental state, and yet a legal outcome that would surprise many. At trial, the Texas jury acquitted Robert of murder charges, accepting his claim of self-defense, though he was convicted on lesser charges for evidence tampering in relation to the disposal of the bod. Why? The acquittal in Galveston was a turning point, a legal result that kept more questions than answers. The missing person case for Kathleen hovered in police archives for years. Local detectives followed leads, friends conducted background checks, and journalists poked at inconsistencies. For a long time, the case remained open but unsolved. A family grief with no exit, the lack of physical evidence, no body, no conclusive forensic trail made it nearly impossible to transform suspicion into charges. The Galveston case exploded into public view after the discovery of Black's remains. A man with a high-profile family name was arrested thousands of miles from Manhattan. The trial in Texas became a media sensation because of the grisly facts and the strangeness of it. Affluent heir living under aliases in a coastal town, the defense leaned heavily on a narrative of self-defense and survival in an encounter that spiraled into violence. Jurors, charged with a heavy decision, ultimately accepted that narrative with respect to murder. The public, however, remained unsettled by the dismemberment and by how someone could both dismember a body and be acquitted of murder. The contradictory nature of the outcome intensified scrutiny and suspicions rather than placing them to rest. With new attention and the documentary's materials, prosecutors began re-examining old evidence and seeking fresh testimony. Witnesses were recontacted, phone records and bank trails were sifted. Forensic experts reinterpreted what was left. In Susan Berman's case, prosecutors argued that she had been killed to prevent her as a trusted friend from talking to police about Kathleen's disappearance. For decades, that interplay of motive and secrecy was only theory. In the 2010s, it became the thread prosecutors tried to pull. Investigators would also use interviews and depositions to place Robert in proximity to people and events in ways that previous inquiries had not fully exploited. While law enforcement followed forensic and testimonial threads, the Durst family's internal disputes over trust, control, and money continued in parallel. Robert's long legal fight with his brothers over trust settlement details, a bitter and public litigation, had separated him from the central apparatus of the family empire. For many observers, that distance helped explain how he could quietly slip into new lives and avoid the spotlight for years. Douglas and other family members, meanwhile, found themselves defending the family name publicly, walking a tightrope between familial loyalty and the growing suspicion around Robert. The years of investigation, media attention, and public fascination reached a turning point in 2015 and then again several years later. In 2015, following the publicity generated by the HBO documentary and shortly before its final episode aired, law enforcement authorities moved. Robert was arrested after authorities executed warrants related to the decades-old cases. The documentary's final episode, The Hot Mick Moment, and other evidence reignited attention. Suddenly, what had been a mosaic of suspicion turned into a prosecutorial pursuit. In 2021, after a lengthy trial focused on the murder of Susan Berman, a California jury convicted him of first-degree murder, and a judge sentenced him to life without parole. The conviction and sentence appeared to be the culmination of an effort to hold someone accountable for a killing prosecutors argued was tied directly to preventing the truth about Kathleen's disappearance from coming to light. Reporting on the conviction and sentencing outlined the prosecution's case and the court's decisions. In the months after the conviction for Berman's murder, prosecutors in Westchester County moved to charge Robert in connection with the 1980 disappearance of Kathleen, whose absence had haunted her family for decades. The filing of a charge after so many years reopened old wounds for the family and showed how persistence from investigators and the renewed attention of prosecutors could finally transform cold suspicion into formal allegations. The case into Kathleen's disappearance remained legally unresolved when Robert's health declined. Legal processes have their own momentum. After the 2021 conviction, appeals were filed. Then, in early 2022, Robert Durst died in custody. His death had complex legal consequences, most notably that the conviction was, by law, vacated pending appeals, a technicality that frustrated victims' families and prosecutors who felt that justice had, for all intents and purposes, been delivered. For the families and friends of the victims, the legal technicalities were of little solace or comfort. The emotional closure of a conviction contrasted sharply with the bitter legal reality that a conviction could be set aside after a death pending appeal. The spectacle of the family name in headlines persisted, questions about inheritance, estate claims, and the shadow the cases cast over family holdings would remain long after the trials and appeals. While Robert's story dominated the headlines, the rest of the Durst family, including Douglas, who had steered the Durst Organization through years of expansion and legal battles, continued the day-to-day. Why of a vast real estate enterprise, public trust is fragile. A family's reputation, built across decades of development and business deals, is not easily repaired after such notoriety. The balance between continuing a company that built cities and confronting the moral and legal aftermath of a family member's alleged crimes created complicated narratives in the press and inside boardrooms for Douglas and others. The task became both business management and reputation repair, keeping tenants happy, investors reassured, and the company running while the public digested the darker chapters attached to one member, the brother, the dynasty, the missing wife, the friend gone in her kitchen, the neighbor in Galveston. All of them are pieces of a human puzzle for those who loved Kathleen, for Susan Berman's friends who mourned a life cut short, for Morris Black's family and neighbors who were left with a gruesome memory. The legal answers might never be a full solve. For the public, the lessons are more ambiguous. Wealth buys time, sometimes invisibility, and sometimes a spotlight that finally finds a person no one could seem to catch. At the center of this story is a question as old as wealth and fame. Can a family's name outlive its worst chapters? And should it? The towers the Durst built still rise. The people whose lives were broken by these events remain changed. The system of justice took a generation to move, and moved unevenly. In the end, we are left with the echo of a life once cloaked by privilege, now reduced to a court transcript. We are left with the faces and photographs, the headlines that stack like bricks, and the quiet empty rooms where a wife's place at the table was never filled. If you close your eyes and listen not to the gavel or the microphone, but to the silence that remained behind those doors, you'll hear what mattered most: the people who are gone, the family left to reckon with their name, and the way the truth, when it finally arrives, rarely fits cleanly into our expectations. It arrives imperfect, late, and never without cost.